What happens when a woman discarded like trash by her billionaire in-laws refuses to be broken? Aurora Evans was told she was worthless, a stain on the immaculate Sterling family name, and thrown onto the streets with nothing. They thought she would disappear, a forgotten chapter in their gilded lives. But they underestimated her. They never imagined that the woman they tried to erase would be the one to decide their fate. This is a story of a spectacular fall, an impossible rise, and the moment a titan of industry walked into a boardroom to beg for a lifeline, only to find the woman he destroyed sitting in the CEO's chair. The air in the Sterling mansion was like the air in a museum, perfectly climate-controlled still and heavy with the weight of history. It was a beautiful prison, and Aurora Evans was its most beautifully decorated inmate. From the outside, her life was a fairy tale. A girl from a modest background in Queens who had captured the heart of William Sterling III, the sole heir to the Sterling Industries fortune. Their wedding was the society event of the year, a spectacle of wealth and power splashed across the pages of Vogue and Forbes. But once the flashbulbs faded, the reality of her new life set in. The queen of this gilded cage was Genevieve Sterling Williams' mother, a woman carved from ice whose smile never quite reached her piercing blue eyes. From the moment William introduced Aurora, Genevieve saw not a daughter-in-law, but a contamination. Aurora's hands, though graceful, were not the hands of a woman who had been manicured since birth. Her degree in art history, once her pride, was deemed a frivolous hobby by Genevieve, who believed a woman's only worthy education was in managing a household and a charity gala. "Darling," Genevieve would say, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "That dress is bold. In our circles, we tend to find elegance in subtlety." It was a constant barrage of such remarks, small, precise cuts designed to bleed Aurora of her confidence. William, her husband, was her sanctuary, but a fragile one. He loved her, of that Aurora was certain. In the quiet moments away from his family's suffocating presence, he was the same warm, funny, and kind man she had fallen for. He would hold her and whisper apologies for his mother's behavior. "She just needs time, Rory," he'd plead. "She's from a different generation. She doesn't see you like I do." But time only seemed to sharpen Genevieve's disdain. Aurora tried everything. She studied the family history, memorized the names and lineages of their powerful friends, traded her vibrant wardrobe for muted cashmeres and silks, and learned to navigate a dinner party with the practiced ease of a diplomat. Yet it was never enough. She was an actress playing a role she was never cast for, and her audience was relentlessly critical. The patriarch, Robert Sterling, was a ghost in the narrative. A formidable figure in the boardroom, but at home he was a silent partner in his wife's domestic tyranny. He would offer Aurora a curt nod at dinner, his eyes already on the financial reports waiting in his study. He had entrusted the family's social purity to Genevieve, and he did not interfere. The breaking point began subtly. Sterling Industries. The colossal empire built on steel and oil was beginning to show its age. The world was moving towards technology and sustainable energy. But Robert Sterling was a traditionalist. He scoffed at the green nonsense and the tech bubbles. He believed in tangible assets in the bedrock industries that had made his family a dynasty. Aurora, with her keen mind and outsider's perspective, saw the writing on the wall. During a family dinner, a rare event where business was discussed, she gently suggested exploring investments in renewable energy. "I read a fascinating analysis by a firm called Innovate Dynamics," she began. "They're predicting a massive market shift." She was cut off by Genevieve's sharp, tinkling laugh. "Oh, Aurora, darling, let's leave the business talk to the men. Shall we? You're so charming when you stick to what you know. Art, isn't it?" William shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but said nothing. Robert Sterling looked at her as if she were a piece of furniture that had suddenly spoken. The dismissal was absolute, a public humiliation that stung more than any comment about her clothes. It was the moment she realized she wasn't just an outsider. She was considered a fool. They didn't just dislike her. They had no respect for her. And in the Sterling world, respect was a currency more valuable than gold. As she sat in silence for the remainder of the meal, a cold resolve began to form in her heart. She had tried to be one of them. She had tried to earn their love, then their acceptance, and finally just their tolerance. She had failed on all fronts. Genevieve Sterling did not believe in leaving things to chance. She had watched Aurora for 2 years, waiting for a fatal misstep. When none came, she decided to manufacture one. The plot was as intricate and cold-hearted as its architect. It began with the careful cultivation of a new friend for Aurora, a young woman named Cassandra Vance, the daughter of a minor business associate. Cassandra was charming, sympathetic, and seemingly the only one in their social circle who treated Aurora as an equal. She was also on Genevieve's payroll. Cassandra became Aurora's confidant. She listened to Aurora's frustrations about the family, her worries about the company's stagnation, and her dreams of having a life that was more than just a series of charity luncheons. Aurora, starved for genuine connection, opened up completely. She shared the business ideas she had, the very ones her in-laws had ridiculed. The second part of the plan involved a man, Julian Croft, a charismatic art dealer Genevieve had hired. He was instructed to pursue Aurora, to meet her for professional lunches, to discuss art for a new hospital wing. Genevieve was chairing a project she had uncharacteristically assigned to Aurora. The lunches were a setup. Long-lensed photographers were always nearby. Julian was handsome, attentive, and spoke Aurora's language of art and culture. He was everything William, who was increasingly consumed by company pressures, was not. Aurora, though lonely, was steadfastly loyal. She maintained a polite, professional distance, but the carefully edited photos told a different story. Intimate laughter, a hand lingering on an arm, a shared glance across a candle-lit table. The final piece was corporate espionage. Using the information gleaned by Cassandra, Genevieve had her own people leak a slightly altered version of Aurora's renewable energy proposal to a rival company. The leak was designed to be traceable back to a new encrypted laptop that Genevieve had gifted Aurora for her birthday, a device she knew Aurora used for all her personal correspondence and research. The storm broke on a Tuesday evening. William came home late, his face pale and grim. Genevieve and Robert were waiting in the grand library, a room reserved for executions and declarations of war. "William, thank you for joining us," Genevieve said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "We have a family matter to discuss." On the polished mahogany table were 2 folders. Robert slid the first one towards Aurora. It contained the photographs of her and Julian Croft. Each one was a perfectly framed lie. "Explain this," Robert commanded, his voice a low growl. "It's not what it looks like," Aurora said, her heart pounding. "Julian is an art consultant. Your wife hired him to help me with the Children's Hospital charity project." Genevieve scoffed. "A likely story. A girl with your background would certainly be tempted by a man who appreciates her passions, especially when her husband is so busy trying to salvage the family business." Before Aurora could defend herself, Robert pushed the second folder forward. It was a report from Sterling Industries' internal security team. It detailed the data leak, tracing the IP address directly to Aurora's laptop. It showed dates and times that corresponded with her meetings with Cassandra. "You've been passing company secrets," Robert accused, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "You, a girl we took in, have been conspiring to ruin us." "No, I would never," Aurora cried, looking desperately at her husband. "William, you have to believe me. This is insane." William looked at the photos, then at the security report. His face was a mask of confusion and hurt. He had been hearing his mother's whispers for months, seeds of doubt planted about Aurora's background, her ambition, her unsuitability. He saw the evidence laid out before him, a case so perfectly constructed that it left little room for the truth. "How could you, Rory?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "After everything. With him. And the company. It's a lie, William. All of it." She pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Your mother has always hated me. Can't you see? She set this up." Genevieve stood up, her posture regal and unforgiving. "Enough of these hysterical accusations. You were a mistake from the beginning, a grasping, common little social climber. We gave you a world you could only dream of, and you spat in our faces. You will leave this house tonight." "William, please," Aurora begged, turning to her husband one last time. "Don't let her do this." William couldn't meet her eyes. He looked at his mother, then at his father, the two pillars of his world. He had spent his entire life living up to their expectations, and in that moment, he was too weak, too indoctrinated to defy them. He looked away from his wife's tear-streaked face and gave a barely perceptible shake of his head. That was the true betrayal. Not the lies, not the photos, not the false accusations. It was the silence of the man who had vowed to protect her. The silence that condemned her. The verdict was delivered, and the sentence was carried out with chilling efficiency. Genevieve had been preparing for this moment. As Aurora stood frozen in disbelief in the library, two household staff members, their faces impassive, appeared at the door. "See Ms. Evans out," Genevieve instructed, the title a deliberate twist of the knife. "She is to take nothing with her but the clothes she is wearing." "You can't do this," Aurora whispered, the words catching in her throat. "My things, my personal belongings." "The items in this house were purchased with sterling money," Genevieve said coldly. "They are not yours. You came into this family with nothing, and you will leave the same way." She gestured to a small envelope on the table. "However, we are not entirely without pity. This contains a check for $50,000. It is a severance, if you will. Sign this non-disclosure agreement, and the money is yours. Refuse, and we will not only press charges for corporate espionage, but also release these photographs to every tabloid in the country. Your reputation will be utterly destroyed." Aurora looked at the document, then at the faces of the family she had tried so hard to be a part of. Robert was rigid with fury. William was a statue of shame, his gaze fixed on the floor. And Genevieve was triumphant. In that instant, something inside Aurora snapped. The pleading, heartbroken woman vanished, and in her place was someone forged in the fires of betrayal. She walked over to the table, picked up the envelope, and looked directly into Genevieve's eyes. With deliberate slowness, she tore the envelope, the check, and the NDA in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces flutter onto the Persian rug. "I don't want your pity," she said, her voice steady and clear, resonating with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "And I don't want your blood money. You can keep your house, your name, and your lies." She turned her gaze to William, a look of profound sorrow and finality in her eyes. "I hope it was worth it." She turned and walked out of the library, head held high, flanked by the silent staff. She didn't look back. She walked through this grand foyer, past the priceless art she had once admired beneath the crystal chandelier that had seemed so magical on her wedding day. The heavy oak doors which had once opened to welcome her into a new life now boomed shut behind her, sealing her out forever. She was standing on the curb of Fifth Avenue, the sounds of New York City a deafening roar. The night air was cold, and she shivered in her thin silk blouse. She had no coat, no purse, no phone, no keys, nothing. The tears she had held back finally came hot and furious. She wasn't just crying for the loss of her husband or the life she'd known. She was crying for the naive girl who believed love could conquer all, the girl who had been so systematically dismantled and discarded. For hours she walked. She had no destination. The city lights blurred through her tears. She was invisible, just another anonymous face in the crowd. The reality of her situation was a crushing weight. She was homeless, penniless, and utterly alone. Her own family, a modest working-class family from Queens, had been so intimidated by the Sterlings that she had become estranged from them, a casualty of the class divide. She had no one to call, nowhere to go. That night she found herself in Penn Station, huddled on a bench among the other lost souls of the city, trying to be invisible. The harsh fluorescent lights beat down on her, stripping away the last vestiges of her former life. The designer clothes felt like a costume. The perfect hair and makeup were a mockery. Underneath it all, she was just Aurora Evans again, and she had never felt more lost. The city that had once promised her a fairy tale had become a concrete jungle, and she had no idea how she would survive until morning. The despair was a physical entity, a cold, heavy thing settling in her chest. The Sterlings hadn't just thrown her out. They had tried to erase her, and in the bleak, lonely hours of that first night, she almost let them. The first few weeks were a blur of survival. Aurora sold her designer dress and shoes at a consignment shop for a pittance, enough for a few nights at a dingy hostel and some cheap food. The humiliation was a constant companion. Every pitying glance, every dismissive gesture was a fresh reminder of how far she had fallen. The name Sterling was a curse, a brand that marked her as a failure. She found a job waitressing at a small diner in Hell's Kitchen, working double shifts until her feet were numb and her spirit felt hollowed out. She was haunted by the betrayal replaying William's silence in her mind until it became a dull, throbbing ache. The anger came later. It wasn't the explosive rage she had felt in the library, but a slow, simmering fire. It was the anger of injustice, the fury of a life stolen. That anger became her fuel. She realized the Sterlings expected her to fade away, to become a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. She decided with every fiber of her being that she would not give them the satisfaction. Her transformation began in the public library. Surrounded by the quiet dignity of books, she found a sliver of her old self. She started reading not art history, but business journals, tech magazines, and market analyses. The article she had tried to show the Sterlings about Innovate Dynamics resurfaced in her mind. She devoured everything she could find about the company and its visionary founder, a man who had built an empire on looking forward, not back. She enrolled in night classes at a community college, starting with basic business administration and finance. The The classroom was a world away from the Sterling mansion. It was filled with people like her, people fighting for a second chance, people who knew the value of $1 and the bitterness of struggle. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged somewhere. One of her professors, a stern but brilliant woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, saw the spark in Aurora's eyes. Aurora's questions were sharper, her insights more profound than any other student's. Dr. Sharma pushed her, challenged her, and eventually recommended her for an unpaid internship at a small tech startup. It was grueling. She would work her waitressing shift until 2 a.m., sleep for 4 hours, then take the subway to her internship, where she did menial tasks, fetching coffee, making copies, organizing data. But she watched and she learned. She saw how a company was built from the ground up, not through inheritance, but through innovation, risk, and relentless hard work. Her break came during a company-wide crisis. A major client presentation had been corrupted, and the team was panicking. Aurora, who had spent nights teaching herself data recovery and analysis, stepped forward. Working for 18 hours straight, fueled by cheap coffee and sheer determination, she not only recovered the data, but also identified a critical flaw in their model. She rebuilt the presentation from scratch, adding her own insights which were sharper and more forward-thinking than the original. The CEO was stunned. He offered her a full-time paid position on the spot. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a beginning. It was a step on a ladder she was building for herself. A year later, feeling more confident, she applied for an entry-level analyst position at a much larger firm. During the interview process, she met Mr. Kaito Tanaka, a senior executive with a legendary reputation. He was a quiet, observant man who rarely spoke in meetings, but whose few words could shift the direction of the entire company. He saw past her threadbare resume. He saw the fire in her eyes, the steel in her voice. He saw a mind that had been sharpened by adversity. He asked her one final question. Why do you want to work in sustainable technology? Aurora met his gaze without flinching. Because the future belongs to those who build it, not those who inherit the past. And I want to build. Kaito Tanaka hired her. He became her mentor, not in a gentle paternal way, but as a master craftsman would train an apprentice. He was demanding, exacting, and merciless in his critique. He saw her potential and was determined to forge it into something unbreakable. He taught her to be strategic, to anticipate the market, to negotiate without emotion, and to wield power with precision. Under his guidance, Aurora didn't just learn the rules of the corporate world, she learned how to rewrite them. The girl who had been thrown out of the Sterling mansion was gone. A formidable businesswoman was rising from her ashes. The next 5 years were a testament to Aurora's relentless drive. She didn't just climb the corporate ladder. She launched herself up it. Her days started before sunrise and ended long after the city lights had painted the sky. Her tiny apartment was littered with market reports and strategic plans. She had no social life, no hobbies, no distractions. Her work was her life, her revenge, and her salvation. Her employer was Innovate Dynamics, the very company she had once tried to tell the Sterlings about. It was a poetic irony that fueled her every success. Under Mr. Tanaka's tutelage, Aurora honed her instincts. She had a unique ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, to connect disparate industries and predict technological convergence. Her first major project involved heading a small team to develop a new type of biodegradable battery. The established players in the field called it impossible. Aurora and her team worked for a year, facing setback after setback. She inspired them, pushed them, and celebrated every small victory with them. When they finally succeeded, the resulting patent was worth billions and revolutionized the portable electronics industry. That success catapulted her into the executive ranks. She became the youngest vice president in the company's history. Her name, Aurora Evans, began to be whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. She was known for her surgical precision in acquisitions, her uncanny ability to turn failing divisions into profit centers, and her complete intolerance for the kind of complacent, legacy-based thinking that was rotting the core of companies like Sterling Industries. She never spoke of her past. To her colleagues, she was a self-made woman, a mystery, with no history before her arrival at Innovate Dynamics. They saw the result, the polished, unassailable executive, but had no idea about the fire that had forged her. Meanwhile, the Sterling empire was crumbling. Robert Sterling's refusal to adapt had become a death sentence. Their oil fields faced new environmental regulations, their steel mills were being undercut by more efficient foreign competitors, and their investments remained stubbornly in the past. They were a dinosaur sinking into the tar pit of their own arrogance. The business journals that once celebrated their legacy now ran articles with titles like The Sterling Stagnation and An Empire in Decline. William, who had been promoted to CEO in a desperate attempt by the board to signal a change, was in over his head. He lacked his father's ruthless instincts and his mother's strategic cunning. He was a caretaker, not a visionary, and he was presiding over the slow, agonizing dissolution of his family's legacy. He had tried to implement some changes, but the old guard, loyal to his father, resisted him at every turn. Aurora read about their struggles with a cold, detached satisfaction. She tracked their falling stock prices, their credit downgrades, and their failed product launches. It wasn't about gloating, it was about data. Each failure was a vindication of the path she had taken, and the one they had refused to see. One evening, Mr. Tanaka called her into his office. He was nearing retirement and had become the chairman of the board. He looked at her with a rare expression of pride. "The board has been discussing the future of this company," he said, getting straight to the point. "My successor. They considered many outside candidates. I told them they were fools. There is only one choice." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "The CEO position is yours, Aurora, if you want it." Aurora felt a tremor go through her, the culmination of years of relentless effort. She thought of the girl on the bench in Penn Station, shivering and hopeless. She thought of Genevieve's triumphant smirk. She thought of William's averted eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice unshakable. "I want it." A month later, the announcement was made. Aurora Evans was named the new Chief Executive Officer of Innovate Dynamics, one of the most powerful and influential tech companies in the world. The news sent shockwaves through the industry. Forbes ran a cover story on her, "The Phoenix: How Aurora Evans Reinvented the Future." The article detailed her meteoric rise, but noted her past was a closely guarded secret. In a mansion on Fifth Avenue, the Sterling family read the news, never once making the connection. To them, Aurora Evans was just a powerful name, a faceless competitor. The woman they had thrown away was in their minds, long gone and forgotten. The corner office on the 80th floor of the Innovate Dynamics Tower was a universe away from the diner in Hell's Kitchen. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a city that had once cast her out and now lay at her feet. But Aurora Evans didn't spend much time looking at the view. Her focus was on the screens in front of her, displaying real-time data from a global empire of her own making. Being CEO was not a victory lap. It was a new battlefield. Aurora was more driven than ever. She restructured the company, cutting away the fat and investing heavily in speculative R&D quantum computing, AI-driven logistics, and most significantly, a revolutionary new energy grid technology that promised to make fossil fuels obsolete. Her moves were bold, sometimes brutal, but always successful. Innovate Dynamics' stock soared, and Aurora became one of the most powerful women in the world. She lived a quiet, disciplined life. Her apartment was a minimalist sanctuary in the sky. She had few friends and trusted even fewer people. Her past was a locked room, and she was the only one with the key. Sometimes, late at night, when the city was quiet, the ghosts would visit. The memory of William's betrayal, the sting of Genevieve's words. But they were no longer wounds. They were scars, reminders of the strength she had forged in the wreckage of her former life. It was during a quarterly earnings call that the name Sterling Industries crossed her desk again. It wasn't as a competitor. It was in a risk assessment report about market volatility. Sterling Industries was on the verge of total collapse. They had defaulted on several major loans, their credit was shot, and their last-ditch effort to modernize had been a catastrophic failure. They were hemorrhaging money, and bankruptcy was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. Their only hope was a buyout. But who would want to acquire such a toxic, antiquated asset? The company was a behemoth, and its pension liabilities alone were enough to scare off most investors. Aurora read the report, her face betraying no emotion. Her COO, a sharp man named David Chen, mentioned it in their morning briefing. "Sterling Industries is officially on the block," David said, scrolling through his tablet. "The banks are forcing a sale to recoup their losses. It's a mess. Whoever buys it will have to gut the whole thing. It's a vulture's feast." "What are their core assets?" Aurora asked, her voice calm and even. "Some valuable real estate, of course. A few legacy patents that might be worth something. But mostly it's a mountain of debt and outdated infrastructure. We've run the numbers. It's not a fit here for us. The brand is toxic, and the culture is prehistoric." "Run the numbers again," Aurora commanded. "Don't look at it as an acquisition of a competitor. Look at it as an acquisition of infrastructure. We need to expand our energy grid manufacturing. Their old steel mills are strategically located near deep water ports. We could retrofit them, tear out the old, and build the new. The real estate alone is undervalued." David looked at her surprised. It would be a massive hostile undertaking. The Sterling family still holds a controlling interest, even if it's mostly worthless now. They'd fight us. A small, cold smile touched Aurora's lips for the first time that day. "Let them," she said. The plan was audacious. Innovate Dynamics wouldn't just buy Sterling Industries. It would absorb it, cannibalize its useful parts, and discard the rest. It was the kind of ruthless, forward-thinking move she was famous for. But for Aurora, it was something more. It was the closing of a circle. She let the banks know through back channels that Innovate Dynamics might be interested. The news sent a ripple of hope through the financial world. A partnership with the world's most innovative company was the only thing that could save the Sterling name from ruin. A request for a meeting came within hours. It was from William Sterling III. He was personally requesting a meeting with the CEO of Innovate Dynamics to plead his case for a merger of equals, a desperate face-saving term that made Aurora laugh out loud in her empty office. She told her assistant to schedule the meeting. "Book the main boardroom," she said, "and clear my calendar for the rest of the day." The hunt was over. The prey was walking into the trap. The morning of the meeting, the air in the Innovate Dynamics headquarters crackled with anticipation. The senior staff knew this was a monumental deal, a chance to acquire a century's worth of assets for pennies on the dollar. Only Aurora knew the true stakes. She dressed with meticulous care in a tailored suit of charcoal grey, the colour of ash and steel. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot. Her only adornment was a simple modern watch on her wrist. There was no trace of the young woman who had favoured soft colours and flowing fabrics. This was a uniform and armour. She stood by the window of her office, looking down at the city. 7 years. 7 years since she had stood on a curb on Fifth Avenue with nothing. Now the owners of that street, the kings of that world, were coming to her as beggars. The irony was so thick she could taste it. There was no elation, no joy. Only a profound, ice-cold sense of purpose. This was not about revenge. Revenge was a passionate, messy emotion. This was about justice. It was about balancing the scales with the weight of an empire. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Evans, the Sterling delegation has arrived. They are on their way to the main boardroom." "Thank you, Claire," Aurora said. "I'll be there in 5 minutes." She took a deep breath, centered herself, and walked out of her office. Her stride was confident, her presence commanding. As she walked down the hall, employees respectfully moved aside, murmuring greetings. She was their leader, a figure of inspiration and intimidation. Inside the boardroom, the Sterling family waited. It was a delegation of ghosts. Robert Sterling, who had once been a titan of industry, looked frail and tired, the stress of his company's collapse having aged him a decade. Genevieve was as immaculately dressed as ever, but a brittle tension radiated from her. The mask of serene superiority had cracked, revealing the fear beneath. And then there was William. He stood by the window, his back to the door, looking out at the same view Aurora had just seen, but from a different perspective. He was no longer the golden heir. He looked worn down, defeated by a weight he was never strong enough to carry. The boardroom door opened. David Chen entered first. "Thank you for waiting. The CEO of Innovate Dynamics, Ms. Aurora Evans." Aurora walked in. For a moment there was complete silence, broken only by the faint hum of the building's climate control. The Sterlings stared, their faces a tableau of shock and utter disbelief. It was Genevieve who reacted first. A soft gasp escaped her lips, her perfectly manicured hand flying to her mouth. Robert's eyes widened, his face draining of all color as he sank slightly in his chair. William turned around slowly, his name having been spoken by David. His eyes met Aurora's. The recognition was instantaneous, followed by a wave of confusion, and then a tidal wave of dawning horror. The blood rushed from his face, leaving him looking ashen and spectral. "Rory." He breathed the old pet name, a phantom on his lips. Aurora did not smile. Her expression was neutral, her eyes as cold and clear as a winter sky. She walked to the head of the table, her rightful place, and sat down. She gestured to the chairs opposite her. "Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling," she said, her voice crisp and professional, betraying no hint of their shared history. "William, please have a seat. We have a great deal to discuss." Her use of William's full name was a deliberate, calculated strike. It severed the last thread of intimacy between them. She was not Rory, the wife he had abandoned. She was Ms. Evans, the CEO, who held his family's entire world in the palm of her hand. The collision they never saw coming had happened, and the wreckage was all on their side. The Sterlings sat down as if their limbs were made of lead. The shock had rendered them speechless. Genevieve's composure, her greatest weapon, had shattered. She stared at Aurora, her mind racing, trying to reconcile the image of the weeping girl she had thrown out with the powerful, unreadable woman sitting before them. William was the first to find his voice, though it was weak and unsteady. "Aurora, I don't understand." "How?" Aurora looked at him, her gaze unflinching. "That isn't on the agenda for today, William. We're here to discuss the acquisition of Sterling Industries by Innovate Dynamics. Let's not waste time on pleasantries." She turned her attention to Robert the Patriarch, the man who had judged her unworthy. "Mr. Sterling, my team has analyzed your company's portfolio. To be blunt, it's a disaster. You're over-leveraged, your infrastructure is obsolete, and your brand is synonymous with stagnation. You are, for all intents and purposes, bankrupt." Every word was a perfectly polished stone, hurled with devastating accuracy. Robert flinched, the truth of her assessment undeniable. We were hoping for a merger," he stammered, the last vestiges of his pride clinging to the word. "A partnership." Aurora gave a slight dismissive shake of her head. "A merger implies that both parties bring value to the table. You bring nothing but debt and decay. This will not be a merger. It will be an acquisition. Innovate Dynamics will purchase your remaining assets for the price of your outstanding debt. We will absorb your liabilities, and in return we take everything. Your name, your factories, your real estate, your patents. Everything." Genevieve finally spoke, her voice a venomous hiss. "You did this. You planned this. This is your revenge. Revenge." Aurora's laugh was a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "Mrs. Sterling, you vastly overestimate your importance. This is not revenge. This is business. Your company is a sinking ship, and I happen to have a use for the scrap metal. The fact that you are the ones drowning is merely a coincidence of the market." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Genevieve's. "You taught me a valuable lesson all those years ago. You taught me that sentiment is a liability, and that power is the only thing that matters. I simply learned the lesson better than you ever imagined." She then turned back to William. He looked utterly broken, his face a canvas of regret. "Rory, please." He began, his voice thick with emotion. "I was a fool. I was a coward. I have lived with what I did, what I let them do every single day, for 7 years. If there is any part of the woman I loved still in there, please, don't do this to my family." Aurora listened, her expression unmoving. The plea which once would have shattered her heart now barely registered. The woman he loved was gone. They had killed her in that library 7 years ago. The woman you loved would have advised your father to invest in renewable energy 7 years ago. She stated, her voice like ice. The woman you loved would have saved this company. But you didn't listen to her. You listened to them. She gestured towards his parents. "You made your choice, William, and these are the consequences." She stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "I have the contracts here. My offer is non-negotiable and expires at the end of the business day. You will sell Sterling Industries to me for my price and on my terms. You will all relinquish your positions on the board, and any and all roles within the company effective immediately. In return, I will not see you ruined in the streets. Your personal assets, what little you have left, that isn't tied to the company, will be safe. It's a more generous offer than the one you gave me." She paused at the door, turning back to look at them one last time. They were 3 statues of defeat, trapped in a glass and steel tomb of their own making. "You have until 5 p.m. to sign. Have your lawyers review it if you wish, but the terms will not change. Welcome to the future, Sterlings. It's a shame you didn't see it coming." With that, she walked out, leaving them to suffocate in the silence and the ruins of their fallen dynasty. Aurora didn't go back to her office. She went to a small private lounge on the executive floor, a quiet space she had designed for herself. The adrenaline of the confrontation receded, leaving behind a profound stillness. She hadn't felt the vindictive triumph she once thought she would. Instead, there was a sense of closure, the quiet click of a final lock turning into place. The past was no longer a ghost haunting her. It was a fool in a cabinet, closed and archived. At 4:45 p.m., her assistant informed her that the signed documents had arrived by courier. They had accepted. Of course they had. They had no other choice. She had stripped them of their power, their legacy and their pride, leaving them with just enough to live out their days in quiet, wealthy obscurity. A gilded cage of a different sort. It was a fate far more fitting than ruin. They would have to live every day with the knowledge that the woman they had destroyed was the architect of their salvation and their defeat. The next day, Aurora called a company-wide town hall. The acquisition of Sterling Industries was announced. She laid out her vision with clarity and passion. It was not about dominating an old rival. It was about transformation. "We are not just buying a company," she told her employees, her voice resonating with power and conviction. "We are buying an opportunity. We will take the bones of the industrial age and build the foundation of a sustainable future. Their factories will not be shut down. They will be reborn. Their workers will not be laid off. They will be retrained. We will turn symbols of the past into beacons of the future." The plan was revolutionary. She invested billions into retrofitting the old Sterling mills, turning them into state-of-the-art facilities for producing her new grid technology. She established training programs for the Sterling workforce, giving them the skills for the new green economy. It was a move praised by unions, environmental groups, and Wall Street alike. It was a masterstroke of business and public relations. A week later, William requested to see her one last time. She agreed to meet him not in the boardroom, but in a small, neutral cafe far from either of their worlds. He looked older, humbled. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said, stirring a coffee he wouldn't drink. "I just needed to say it. I'm sorry, Aurora, for everything. I was weak. I loved you and I failed you in every way a man can fail a woman. I see that now." Aurora listened, sipping her tea. "I know, William," she said, and for the first time her voice held a trace of something other than ice. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was understanding. "We were both very different people back then." "Is there any chance?" he started, then trailed off, knowing the answer. "No," she said softly, but with absolute finality. "That door is closed. I'm not the woman you married. You and your family took care of that. But I want you to know what I am doing with the company. It's not about destroying the Sterling legacy. It's about building a new one. A better one." She stood up to leave. "Goodbye, William. I wish you peace." She walked out of the cafe and back into the sunlight. She had faced her past and emerged not just victorious, but whole. Her identity was no longer defined by what had been done to her, but by what she had built. The newly formed company was not called Sterling Dynamics. Aurora erased the name entirely. She called the new conglomerate Avum, the Latin word for a new era. It was her legacy born not of inheritance but of resilience. She had been thrown out broken and left with nothing. But in the end she had taken their world, their name, and their future, and remade them all in her own image. 5 years had passed since the birth of Avon. The name Sterling was now a footnote in business history books, a classic case study of a dynasty that failed to adapt. Avon, however, was the subject of cover stories about the future. Under Aurora's leadership, the company had become a global titan, not just of industry, but of ethics. The retrofitted factories, once symbols of industrial decay, were now the cleanest and most efficient manufacturing plants in the world. The Avon Foundation had become one of the largest philanthropic organizations, globally funding education in STEM for underprivileged youth, a cause Aurora personally championed. Tonight was the Foundation's annual gala. Aurora stood on stage, not in the severe grey suit of a corporate raider, but in a deep blue gown, the color of a twilight sky. The light caught the warmth in her eyes as she looked out at a crowd of scholars, innovators, and the bright-eyed students her foundation was supporting. "A legacy is not what we inherit," she said, her voice calm and clear, resonating through the grand hall. "It is not a name carved onto a building. A legacy is the foundation we build for others to stand upon. It is the doors we open for those who come after us. The past can be a powerful teacher, but it should never be a cage. Our purpose is not to dwell in the halls of yesterday, but to be the architects of tomorrow." There was no bitterness in her words, only a profound and peaceful conviction. She was no longer the warrior fighting a battle. She was the victor, and she had chosen to use her victory, not to gloat, but to build. Miles away in a quiet, manicured suburb of Connecticut, Genevieve Sterling read about the Avon Gala on her tablet. Her life was now a sequence of quiet, lonely days. The invitations to major society events had long since dried up. Her power had been intrinsically linked to the Sterling name, and when that name lost its influence, so did she. She was a queen in exile, ruling over a kingdom of memories. Robert rarely left his study a ghost in his own home. They had their fortune, but they had lost their world. William had chosen a different path. After the acquisition, he had walked away from the money and the name. He moved to a small town in Vermont, bought a modest workshop, and became a high school art teacher. He spent his days covered in clay and paint, helping teenagers find their own voice on canvas. He was poorer than he had ever been, and happier than he had ever known. He followed Aurora's career from a distance, not with regret or envy, but with a sense of awe. She had become the person she was always meant to be, and he had finally found a measure of peace in letting her go. After the gala, Aurora didn't go home to her silent minimalist apartment. She drove herself to Queens, to the small, humble house where she had grown up. She had reconnected with her family years ago, healing the rift that the Sterling's world had created. Inside, her parents were waiting up for her, a warm plate of food on the table. Here she wasn't Ms. Evans, the formidable CEO. She was just Rory. They talked about the neighborhood, about her father's garden, about a cousin's upcoming wedding. It was simple. It was real. It was the anchor that kept her grounded. Later that night, looking out her old bedroom window at the familiar city skyline, she felt a sense of profound contentment. The scars of her past had faded no longer, angry marks of betrayal, but faint silver lines of resilience. She had faced the people who had tried to break her, and had not only survived, but thrived. She had taken their empire of rust and iron and transformed it into a legacy of light and hope. Her journey was complete. She was the architect of her own life, and the future she was building was brilliant. Aurora Evans's story is a powerful reminder that our past does not have to define our future. Thrown away by a family that saw her as worthless, she refused to accept their judgment. Instead of being consumed by bitterness, she channeled her pain into purpose, building an empire on the very principles of innovation and foresight her detractors had scorned. Her return wasn't just about settling a score. It was about demonstrating that true power isn't inherited. It's earned through grit, intelligence, and an unbreakable will. She rewrote her own narrative, turning a story of betrayal into an epic of triumph. What does her journey teach you about the nature of strength and the ultimate form of success? We hope this story moved and inspired you. If you enjoyed Aurora's incredible journey from rock bottom to the top of the world, please show your support by hitting the like button, sharing this video with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and subscribing to our channel for more unforgettable stories of resilience and justice. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an update.